What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Facts on the Ground. I'm Misty Winston, joined by my co-host Jesse Zerwell. Today, we are incredibly excited to be welcoming back to the show Shahid Buttar. He is somebody that we've interviewed before. He had the courage to take on Nancy Pelosi, not once, but twice. She's still yet to debate him. We're going to get her to debate him or somebody at some point. That's going to happen. But thank you so much for coming back. We are actually going to talk about Nancy Pelosi a little bit today. So thank you for joining us again on the show.
Thrilled to be with you, Misty. Thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks.
So this kind of came from a tweet that you sent me that you had put out, and I'll just read it here. The potential criminal liability that Pelosi could personally face before the International Criminal Court for helping cover up CIA torture under Bush represents a conflict of interest ignored nearly entirely by journalists. You're absolutely right there. Are Pelosi's attacks on Ilhan driven by her self-interest? So this is something that when you sent it to me, I was like, he's absolutely right. This never gets talked about. So let's dig into it. I mean, this is the CIA torture report that Nancy Pelosi claims to have been misled about. So what is the significance of this?
So the significance really inheres under the legal standard for torture. International law under the Convention Against Torture, unlike domestic law, does not permit prosecutorial discretion. If you rob a bank or you commit a moving violation or something within domestic law, prosecutors have broad discretion about whether to bring a charge or not. That's not true with respect to torture. If you commit anything related to torture, if you authorize it, if you enable it, if you cover it up, all of those are violations of the International Convention Against Torture, separate from the underlying torture itself. Now, the record reflects there's public reports of Nancy Pelosi having been read into what the CIA called enhanced interrogation as early as 2006, which is to say she knew what was happening. And despite the mandate, the affirmative obligation under international law to disclose, to investigate, to prosecute, she instead covered it up. Now, I want to, there's an interesting opportunity here to note a distinction between two very powerful voices from San Francisco. We have a freakishly heavy footprint in Washington, D.C. We not only have the Speaker of the House, but also the Vice President of the United States and a senior senator who, at the time all this was going down, happened to be the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. That's Dianne Feinstein. And Dianne Feinstein, who I am not frequently prone to praise, she tends to be a rubber stamp. In 2013, of all people, she took to the Senate floor and decried a constitutional crisis under the Obama administration because the CIA had hacked her staff to steal documents to hide its criminal trail over the very same torture that Nancy Pelosi still, to this day, 15 years after learning about it, continues to cover up. All that is a long-winded way of saying that if the US does ever respect the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, as Ilhan thoughtfully invited us to, as we should, there are any number of people in Washington, the entire leadership of the CIA, for instance, many officials from the Obama administration, and particularly the Speaker of the House, who might find themselves facing justice in The Hague. And the fact that they were getting away with, and the press, stenographically reported on this letter that the Democratic leadership wrote condemning Ilhan for being offensive, without noting that the writers of that letter bore potential international criminal liability for a set of issues that they are trying to evade. And the conflict of interest is corrupt. And this isn't corruption of the institutional variety. I talk a lot about military-industrial corruption or corporate corruption. Those are both, largely overlapping, but, somewhat independent, legitimate sectors, police industrial corruption, all kinds of corruption to talk about. This is the 1.0 individual, keep yourself out of prison kind of corruption, which is even more gnarly and frankly demands observation. I'm grateful for the chance to discuss it with you. And I would just note, reflecting on the crisis in journalism that this also portends, I have not heard a single media outlet of any kind, independent or mainstream corporate, discuss this. And I think of that as a constitutional crisis in itself.
Yes. And that's why when you DM'd me, I was like, we have to talk about this. I was immediately like, do you want to come talk about this on the show? Because you're right. I haven't seen anybody, and I don't really consider myself a journalist. I don't know if Jesse does consider himself a journalist. I don't consider myself. I'm just some chick who has a camera and cool friends. But I mean, I am very much a fan of journalism, of good journalism. I love journalists. I love whistleblowers. I feel like those are like the true, those are the people who are, making sure that, at least if they're good, that the truth gets out. So it was really, when I read your tweet and when you said that media hasn't been paying attention to this, I was like, wow, he's right. Nobody, like, I haven't heard anybody. And if I'm wrong, if there's somebody out there who has covered this in a substantive way, I'm sorry, like, I can't watch everybody. But yeah, this is a really interesting thing to think about, that you're right. The writers of that letter against Ilhan Omar, it was written by people who are very much in conflict of interest with the ICC.
And I'm so grateful for the way by your willingness to have this conversation. And I do think it's important in terms of holding institutional media accountable, as well as the underlying institutions and the institutional actors, in this case, the Speaker of the House. There's an interesting parallel with Assange here, where, in the same way that Pelosi and the Democratic leadership are shooting the messenger in punching down and left at a Black Muslim woman in Congress willing to speak a rare truth, the United States government prosecuting publishers and journalists and whistleblowers is very similarly an effort to frankly justify the completely untenable decision to disrespect the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, right? Ilhan saying we should allow international legal bodies to adjudicate American actors, and we, without any shred of justification or any principle at all, bald demonstration of might makes right, the US just refuses to allow international bodies to have any control over our war criminals. And think about, when we think about Assange, it's hard not to think about the collateral murder video. That is, similarly, the collateral murder video is the thing that they were disclosing that invited the ire of the establishment. Ilhan calling for us to respect the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court was a completely legitimate, important thing to be said. And for that to prompt the establishment to strike back, I think is revealing of again, layers of corruption that demand observation and hopefully electoral accountability.
And you mentioned, Shahid, that it's been 15 years since torture essentially was in the public consciousness, and it's all but receded completely from public consciousness. And as you and Misty just mentioned, the mainstream media especially are hugely complicit in that. And with regard to 2006, which you mentioned earlier, I'm curious about any relationship there might be or any communication there might have been between Pelosi at the time and Gina Haspel, who we know was involved very much in the CIA's torture program and was CIA director under Trump.
There very well may have been communication at the time. We know from the public reports that Pelosi was briefed. I don't know who the CIA officials were that were in that briefing. We do know that Gina Haspel was, at least in some way, partly responsible for the destruction of evidence. This is the destruction of videotapes documenting CIA torture that the agency illegally destroyed despite interest from other federal agencies, namely the FBI, in reviewing it. And you could see the entire last 15 years as a sustained saga of ongoing criminality at the Central Intelligence Agency, because it wasn't just the torture, there was then the ensuing cover-up. And that didn't just entail Gina Haspel's destruction of evidence, that included the CIA hacking the Senate in 2013. And it continues to this day. I mean, the Senate investigators from the Intelligence Committee in 2013, I believe one of their names is Doug Jones, if I'm not mistaken. He's in particular been quite outspoken. He did an incredible interview with Jeremy Scahill, this is probably 2 years ago, just with the inside scoop on the torture report, which no one has seen. I mean, it's 1,000 pages long. It depicts offenses as severe as murder and rape, and nobody knows what's in it because the CIA doesn't want it read. And I think of that as if it were ever read, would we still be able to deny the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court? I've said it before. I think the world's worst criminals work for our government, it seems to be.
And it's still continuing. I think that that's a really important thing that we speak on, because, you talked about, they're going after journalists and whistleblowers. They're torturing journalists and whistleblowers. Julian Assange is currently right now been psychologically tortured for over a decade. Chelsea Manning was tortured, forced to be naked in her cell. They would deprive her of sleep. Like, there was a number of things that they were doing to her. In Julian Assange's trial, Khalid al-Masri was a CIA torture victim who was just misidentified and, taken to some black site and tortured for months. And they weren't even going to let him speak at Julian Assange's trial. And it was Julian Assange's releases that he was able to use in court to prove his case. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make, is that, they're, as much as they covered it up then, that cover up is still going on right now. Nancy Pelosi is still covering it up. They're still committing these offenses. And it's because we've never dealt with it. We've never actually examined the fact that this is a real thing that we know happened. There's no accountability. There's never been any accountability. So often the people who expose these things are the ones who get penalized, and the people who perpetrate them, go and dance on Ellen, and, they turn into memes, and, they're cheered, and we talk about them as if they're great people. And it's really, it's a sad state of humanity. It's really frustrating for me to think that this is the way that we've structured our society, to where we elevate war criminals and condemn truth tellers.
You and me both.
2 points.
For someone who doesn't think of themselves as a journalist, you do a pretty damn good job of. Sorry, Jesse, you were saying, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, that's okay. 2 points I wanted to add to that are that Khalid al-Masri, when he was initially going to be denied the chance to testify, Julian Assange got up and said, "No, this man will testify before."
You will not silence the voice of a torture victim, is what he said. I will not allow it.
And then going from there to, I suppose, something that's related but more confined to the US, although there are lots of foreign policy implications, is that I believe with Biden in power, the national security state status quo that was enjoyed by the CIA and other intelligence agencies so much under Clinton, under Bush Jr., under Obama, that came under threat when Trump was in office. And that's why you saw people like James Clapper on, I believe it was CNN, saying that Russians are genetically predisposed to metal. And I believe now they feel
that got by me. I did not see Clapper say that.
Yeah, that was amazing. It was incredibly xenophobic. It was gross on national TV, and nobody batted an eye.
I have a particular history with James Clapper, which I'm
nice.
But just to finish my point, I believe these people, the Brennans, the Clappers, those at the top of the intelligence agencies, and even those below them, feel like the status quo heyday is back under Biden. And when somebody like Ilhan Omar comes out and says something
pretty benign,
totally sensible, and totally within the purview of international legal stipulations
that we fought a world war to establish.
Right. That's a huge, they see that as a huge threat to the status quo that they want returned, or maybe they think it has returned already. So
yes,
I think that's an overarching theme of what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Well, and some of these same people have been regurgitated from the Bush years. I mean, they're still around. They're still around.
Right. I mean, I think about, this takes me back to Ilhan Omar interrogating Elliot Abrams when, we've got Reagan era people being recycled at this point. To the point about the heyday of the Obama years being back, to me, the grand tragedy of the Obama administration was his ratification of the Bush assault on civil liberties. In spite of his campaign promises, he won the White House, declaring himself to be the anti-war candidate who was a constitutional lawyer and was going to reject the Patriot Act. He was going to reject Guantanamo. He was going to reject and end torture. And frankly, he came into office, to give credit where it's due, breathing fire. I will give credit there to Greg Craig. He was the original White House counsel who got forced out just a few months into the Obama administration after congressional Democrats, of all people, love them, congressional Democrats sell out Obama from the right, joining their Republican colleagues early in the Obama administration to pass a bill basically restricting the State Department from resettling within the US Guantanamo detainees who had been cleared for release. And so this is, the president stepping out originally for like the first couple of days. The very first things he did in office were try to end torture, change the FOIA presumptions to try to at least lean towards democratic transparency. And he announced this plan to end Gitmo that he was never able to complete. And in the wake of congressional Democrats selling him out, this is when Rahm Emanuel basically displaced Greg Craig as a sort of power center in the White House. And Obama then ran to the right wing for the next 8 years. And the consequence of that was the bipartisan consensus on authoritarianism. And I want to map this to the widespread misunderstanding of what anti-fascism it means, right? Anti-fascism was the United States official position in the Second World War. And the idea that Antifa is anything different than that, all Antifa is what our grandfathers fought for, right? Similarly, here, when we talk about what Ilhan Omar is proposing, it's nothing more than what we fought a world war to establish, was international law. These aren't just international legal principles that we're casually committed to. We shed blood to establish the Nuremberg precedent.
Yeah,
and it's the Nuremberg precedent that would send the entire CIA leadership to The Hague.
And every president forever.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
at least in recent memory.
Yeah.
Well, Noam Chomsky has said that if the Nuremberg laws were applied,
Jesse?
yes.
Can you not
hear me?
hear? Can you hear us? Uh-oh. Did you lose us? That's not good. Hello? Uh-oh. We always have these problems. It's probably our friendly NSA agent.
Yeah.
We still need to name him
Gotcha.
or her. Oh, there we are. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Jesse. What were you saying?
Just to add on to that, I was going to say that Noam Chomsky has said that if the Nuremberg laws were applied today, then every post-war American president would be hanged. And if you go by the stipulations of international law and what Justice Robert Jackson said at the Nuremberg trials, that all of this is for naught. All of these laws are for naught if they don't apply to the United States as well.
And they don't apply to the United States in any way. The United States is a rogue state. I don't know who needs to hear that, but some people need to hear that. It is a rogue state. It's out of control. Empire is out of control. I mean, if you just examine the things that they're doing right now currently, they're attempting a coup in Peru. They're still trying to overthrow Maduro and Assad, and they're still fighting with Putin, and they're still trying to start shit with China. And it's this, this American exceptionalism. We can do whatever we want. No laws apply to us. It's a real problem.
Yeah, it's the ghost of the Monroe Doctrine in a sense, except now it's spread, or long ago spread, to the Middle East and places in Asia like Afghanistan. And
it's going global.
Pakistan. Yeah.
It really
It's
is.
been global, right?
Yes.
I mean, the American empire, I relate to this in also a weird way. I want to share both my Clapper story and also maybe why I'm sort of, what we're pressing on right now is ultimately why I ran for office. And for me, it's intergenerational. It's kind of embedded in who I am. Like, I am only an American because the Pentagon supported a military dictator in my native country, and my family fled from the religious discrimination that we encountered as a religious minority as a result. And so the serial, and I appreciate you laying, double underscoring this, ongoing international human rights abuses that our country not only facilitates, but actively enables, that would not happen if we were responsible, that would not happen if we had policymakers who did their jobs, is, to me, not just an object of abstract offense. I see a lot of confusion in our body politic at the moment. And many people, for instance, you might identify, for instance, as leftists, they focus on issues like housing and healthcare. And, I want to see healthcare be free at the point of service. I want to see a right to housing. And I am absolutely adamant that we respect international human rights. That becomes a thing on the cutting room floor for many socialists. Like, they just don't worry about it that much. But the military-industrial complex is the central threat to our species. And when we talk about threats to enemies of our Constitution, foreign and domestic, the entire litany of agencies under not just the Department of Defense, but also Homeland Security and even components of justice like the FBI that are particularly engaged in things like monitoring Americans, those agencies become enemies of our Constitution. When people swear oaths of office to the Constitution, when they get to Congress, it's supposed to mean something. And I fear that typically, because we select politicians based on their fundraising prowess, the people we send to Washington are basically tools. They're people who they are cultivated to go with consensus. But the job in Congress is supposed to be to fight the executive branch. You're supposed to go against consensus. The job is to fight the power, not to simply serve it. And this is a layer of politics that I fear has gotten completely, at a civics level, lost. It's like Americans don't even understand what it means to be citizens. And I think at a time like this, when we see sustained criminality at the highest levels of our government, conflicts of interest that are not only undisclosed by the actors, but unobserved by our supposedly vaunted free press, right? And these conflicts of interest that enable ongoing, sustained international human rights abuses at scale. We as citizens have a role to play to defend the international legal framework that we should all be proud of. And when we established the United Nations and the International Criminal Court and the Bretton Woods institutions, that was kind of a high watermark in human civilization. Like, I don't think people understand what a big deal that was. That was a guarantee that the entire species made that whatever your individual states might do, we, humanity, have everybody's back. No one will be subjected to human rights abuses. And in most of the world, that includes, for instance, like being denied healthcare, right? It's not just the case that we claim the authority to violate other people's rights with impunity. We also don't even grant the same national rights here that other countries do abroad. So it's like, layers of rogueness, as you're saying.
And
please.
I think within what you've just been saying with regard to the military-industrial complex, Israel is embedded ineluctably in that.
Right.
And that's another topic which perhaps we can talk about later or now if you want, but that's another one within the military-industrial complex umbrella, if you will, that there's a bipartisan consensus of outright fear, essentially, with criticism of Israel. You can acknowledge Israel, but if it's a criticism, then
that comes down to propaganda.
Right. Your career, you might as well consider your career over, or at least severely diminished.
I mean, Ilhan Omar barely criticized, just tiny little, not even really noteworthy. And the only reason it is noteworthy is because it has been made such a taboo thing that if you're in politics, you cannot talk badly about Israel. It's just not a thing you do. But she just barely topped him, and people freaked out. It was unbelievable.
That tide changing though, because I saw, people freaked out on all sides. The establishment freaked out, and we saw two different letters, written to condemn her. One by Jewish members of Congress who called her anti-Semitic, and then by the leadership who called her offensive and demanded that she clarify her remarks. But the reason that counterattack was so significant politically is it seemed like the internet had her back. And yes. I saw it actually as a moment reflecting the recent shift in consciousness. I don't date this just to this spring, or even for that matter to last spring's mobilizations responding to George Floyd. I go back to the Ferguson uprising in 2014, when I think that's when the dam started to crack. Yes. And I think as people have recognized the wanton, arbitrary, and completely illegitimate nature of state violence, it's hard not to draw the international connections. I have a song called Ferguson to Jerusalem, kind of unpacking how particularly the US support for the Israeli Defense Forces and the training they conduct for US paramilitary police ends up leaving Americans dead in the streets. Every time you see or hear a news story about some innocent person getting pumped full of 20 rounds, that's IDF training. That's paramilitary.
The knee on the neck. The knee on the neck is IDF, all of that.
Right out of the counterinsurgency manual, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we shouldn't be using counterinsurgency tactics with police departments. These aren't occupations, but
it is.
Exactly. You hit it. It's the difference between the words on the paper and, true to the name of your podcast, the facts on the ground. And the facts on the ground, this is why I describe myself as a legal realist. It's important. It's why it's important to call out these conflicts of interest. It's the realism beyond the rhetoric that requires us to grapple with the actual facts. And so often what we grapple with are simply abstractions, claims unsupported by evidence, pretenses. But the facts matter and interests matter. And when you have powerful people who are condemning the only refugee in Congress and I absolutely agree, I just want to make it explicit to Jesse's question that when she called for the US to respect international criminal court's jurisdiction, it was specifically in the context of Israel and Palestine. And what one of the Democratic letters accused her of was of drawing a false equivalency between Hamas.
Yeah, we're worse. US. She should have clarified it. We're way worse than anything Hamas has done. Are you kidding? On a Tuesday, we do more than Hamas has ever done.
Hamas is a legitimate resistance and defense faction in Gaza that also happens to be the democratically elected government of Gaza. But of course, we're always going to hear that Hamas is a terrorist entity, and every conflict or clash that they carry out with Israel, the clock starts with Hamas. It never
Yes.
starts with Israel, and Israel
The decades
starts
of oppression.
everything.
It doesn't start there. It starts with a rocket. You know,
I want to rewind the tape even further. I mean, just think about what is the only country in human history to use weapons of mass destruction to kill hundreds of thousands of unarmed civilians at once.
We have no moral standing against anybody ever. And it is disgusting to me that it's even a thing. I mean, you see like Joe Biden giving speeches the other day talking about how freedom of the press is a foundation of democracy. You need to shut up.
While prosecuting
He needs
Julian
to
Assange.
shut up. You've
Right.
been torturing Julian Assange for over a decade. I don't want to hear a word out of your mouth about press freedom. Not a word. It's
Right.
so hypocritical. And it's really just, it's this American exceptionalism where we want to have our cake and eat it too. We want to be seen as like this bastion of human rights. But when the president of Azerbaijan can stick his finger in your face and make a fool of you, there's a problem. You know, that's a problem. You have a problem when that guy can make you look foolish, because he was absolutely right. Yes, I get it. He's a scumbag. People get mad at me when I praise the fact that he, you know, got into the BBC reporter's face and told her what's what. But he told her what's what, period. End of story. He was 100% correct. You don't get to talk about somebody else's country and the way that they treat their citizens, their journalists or whatever, when you are torturing. I mean, I get that I'm a little bit biased here, but potentially the most important journalist of all time. You just don't get to do that.
Yeah, and especially if your legacy, if you even want to call it that, includes the destruction of Libya, the funding and arming of neo-Nazi factions in Ukraine based solely on this new Cold War ideology. Yemen, there's huge complicity with the Saudi genocide in Yemen. This is not somebody who has any right to stand up in any theater and discuss democracy as if it's
or
some
human rights,
some
or
principle,
anything.
right? As if these are principles that he's ever adhered to. And I think the conversation in an ethical world, his conversation or his point of view would be shut down and laughed at, and he would be
giving his point of view
ridiculed.
from The Hague. Like
Yeah.
if we lived in a sane world.
I was going to say ridicule is not enough. It's prosecution is required.
No, yes, 100%. And I think that all of this comes down to the failure of our mainstream media. Maybe not failure, because they're very much working in the way that they're intended to. But we don't have free media in this country. Very, very tiny bits of it, like independent media. There's some like bright spots here and there that are doing really amazing work. But for the most part, our media is one of the biggest threats that we face, in my personal opinion. I mean, obviously, I'm a free speech and, you know, press freedom activist, and that's what I'm into. But to me, the narrative management is the front line of everything, because they have, the United States of America is by far the most propagandized country on earth. It's not even close. And it's so easy for them to do because they aren't overt about it. They aren't in your face about it. It is like a very kind of subtle way that they manipulate the media and the things that you are able to read, see, hear, and know. And it's only going to continue to get worse. You know, the threats and I mean, it's really just increasing. We see now that journalists at protests are getting photographed, and they're being tracked, and they're being detained, and they're being beaten up, and all of this stuff. I mean, it's really just continuing to get worse across the board. But our mainstream media is a huge threat right now.
I would invite your listeners to particularly grapple with the implications of what I think you're correctly describing. If our press freedom is not a meaningful norm that we can expect anything from, and our nation is systematically violating human rights, both directly and indirectly, in one theater to another all around the world, what does that suggest about our roles as citizens, right? When we show up at baseball games and we're singing anthems about the land of the free and the home of the brave, like, there is not just a rank hypocrisy there, but I would just invite us to consider the responsibility that we have in the United States, bearing our unique privileges to the rest of the world, to simply show up. And I hear so much, political, everything from nihilism, oh, the left can't win anything, the squad this, the squad that. I hear so much disillusion, so much fatigue. And, all I have to say about it, with respect to these like constraints that we face politically that inhibit our movements from expressing themselves at the scale and with the vitality that we need, is that the future doesn't have time for it, and the rest of the world doesn't have time for it, right? I mean, we are living under an age when our government is abusing people all over the planet, and we as citizens are morally culpable for that. Our choices drive the outcome. And it is absolutely true that we are kept in the dark about entirely too many things. Torture comes to mind among them. I keep meaning to tell this Clapper story. It's a little bit out of place.
Yeah.
Surveillance is also among them. And it points to, so that before I ran for Congress, the sort of most prolific thing I ever did, was get arrested in the Senate in 2015 for asking James Clapper a question. It was at the end of a hearing. I did not interrupt anyone. It was gavelled to a close by, the chair was the late John McCain. It was John McCain who had me arrested for asking James Clapper as he walked out the door from behind, 50 feet behind. I asked him, what do you say to communities of color that are so hyper-policed that Eric Garner just got killed in the street for selling cigarettes when you're walking out of this hearing room with a pension and an entourage, even though you committed perjury, lying to the Senate under oath about mass surveillance, and you never paid a price for it? You know, and we basically throw people into jail, we lock people up and throw away the key for the most trivial offenses, and the most serious offenses get you a pension. And we should grapple with that. That layer of corruption is not one in which we as citizens are disinterested. It's not one that we as citizens can disclaim. It's not ones that we are not, in fact, ultimately responsible for. And that's the part I want to like drill down, because when we say they, I appreciate that it's not us doing this, right? But when we say they are prosecuting Assange, or they are supporting a genocide in Yemen, or it's not they. I mean, yes, the consent is contrived and manufactured, but ultimately it is because the people of the United States consent to this, that it happens and continues and has been going on for like 75 years. And it's not okay. And I, just to make this like kind of bring it full circle, and I'm latching on this next part, particularly for climate justice activists and leftists who might not understand how the military-industrial complex has its hands around their throat. The reason we have a climate crisis is because our military-industrial complex has been off the leash for the last 70 years, pulling oil out of the ground from one country to the other, burning more of it than any other institution on the planet. There's no path to climate justice that does not entail shrinking the Pentagon and putting it on a leash. And I see so many people, it's all about climate policy and it's all about the Green New Deal. And like, yes, it matters a lot. And we could get a Green New Deal and it would not fix the problem if the Pentagon is still at liberty to initiate wars for
plunder. And that's why I have a problem with the Green New Deal. It doesn't even mention the military industrial complex, not a once. It didn't even mention fracking, which is really troubling to me. It was a very watered down, corporatized version of the Green Party's Green New Deal. And that's a problem when we have progressives doing that kind of thing. That's a really big problem.
The Green Party had a much more visionary approach to it. I agree with that. I would describe the Green New Deal as necessary, but insufficient.
Yes.
I mean, that
it's a good baby first step. That's a good baby first step. I like it. But military industrial complex, you're right. You absolutely cannot even talk about climate justice and not talk about the military industrial complex. It's just not possible. And that's not the only thing either. I mean, we mentioned the human rights violations and all of these things. This all goes hand in hand. But again, this all comes back to propaganda. We're lied to and misled about the military and their role in the world. And people have no idea. Like, they go to baseball games and they stand up to sing the national anthem and they do feel proud. And I don't know why anybody who has the real facts would ever feel proud of this country.
And think about the hypocrisy there, that these are military indoctrination rituals, basically to not entertain, but to subtly indoctrinate everybody who's there, especially children, into not just accepting, but being proud of, feeling a loyalty toward the US military. And then, so you're basically you're indoctrinating these people to accept and be proud of a worldwide system of violence and human rights violations. And then you have athletes who decide to take a knee in protest against state murder, and they're the ones who are pilloried. And
the truth tellers are always the punished.
And we're supposed to accept as normal these military displays in the middle of sports events. And it goes back to what you were saying, Shahid, about the unreality we're living in. And it reminds me of Baudrillard and Simulacrum. It's like we're living in a simulacrum of democracy. And
it's manufactured reality. That's
everything
what I call
is so hollow.
Yes. Well, everything's manufactured. Everything. I mean, we're propagandized from birth. I mean, the pledge was trending on Twitter the other day, and I'm like, okay, since the pledge is trending, let's talk about the fact that it's weird and cultish, and we should knock it off. Like, nobody should be pledging allegiance to a piece of cloth. Certainly not children who have no idea what that really means or what that flag stands for, what it represents, what's been done in its name. Like that, children, no, that's not an okay thing to do. It's a really weird thing. But you're right. It is like this subtle, lifelong indoctrination. We are propagandized from birth to this whole American exceptionalism. That's really what the indoctrination is about. It's to make us feel that we're exceptional and that things don't apply to us and rules don't apply to us. But it's really frustrating to me because you spoke about how we kind of consent to this stuff. It's really frustrating because it doesn't have to be this way.
Right.
It really doesn't. It doesn't have to be this way. But Caitlin Johnstone speaks on it frequently. I've said it a million times. We need like a mass awakening. We need like people to really just wake up to what actual reality is, which is going to be extremely difficult given the fact that we are fighting against a very sophisticated propaganda machine. Nobody does it better than the United States. Maybe Israel, but I mean, it's kind of hand in hand there. So is one really separate from the other? I don't think so.
Which plays back into the military-industrial complex and the nearly $4 billion we give them a year, mostly to continue their genocide against Palestinians and provide free healthcare and free education to Israeli Jews, at least.
And to train U.S. cops in how to better kill Americans.
Right.
There's a piece here when we were talking about the tide turning recently, and I was trying to locate it in Ferguson, and then the George Floyd protests last year and the movement domestically responding to the recent surge of Israeli violence across Palestine from Gaza to the West Bank. I do see that tide turning, the awakening that you're describing, I think is happening, at least in sectors of our community. And it's important to note that this is an issue that transcends politics. I get, when I was leading the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, for 6 years, I ran a national nonprofit fighting the Obama administration from the constitutional left and right at the same time to defend civil liberties. We were there particularly to try to end the Patriot Act and roll back mass surveillance. And I see a lot of people across the spectrum. It's not just progressives and socialists who get this. There are any number of right-wing voices who are also concerned, and not for the same reasons, but ultimately by the same facts. And I do think of that as representing a not ripe, because it's not ripe at all. It's frankly very fraught, but a fraught political opportunity. The other thing I'd say here is that the awakening hasn't translated itself into electoral representation. And this is part of the problem of our democracy. We can have consensus like we do on bipartisan majorities favoring universal healthcare, for instance, that cannot find expression in policy because the levers of our democracy are broken. The levers of our democracy ultimately are constructed by the policymakers. So at the end of the day, it's a bit of a circular loop. And I would again, invite this back to each of us listening are constructors of this dynamic, if only in who we send to Congress, because Congress can do things here. Barbara Lee has been fighting for 20 years to restrain the Pentagon, to shrink its budget, to limit its authorizations to use military force. Just this year, actually last year was the first time, but this year again, the House passed a resolution to rescind the AUMF, the authorization for the use of military force. Why did that take 20 years? Right? I had a chance to hear Daniel Ellsberg on the 50th anniversary of the Pentagon Papers being released, speaking about how the equivalent papers for Iraq and Afghanistan have never been released. There are secret histories to those wars. We don't know what they are. The Washington Post revealed in December 2019, maybe 2018, that everything we'd heard about the war in Afghanistan for the 20 years preceding that were all lies. So, we've gotten at least hints that this pattern of lying to the public to enable corrupt, internationally criminal behavior is continuing. Yet still, we keep sending these career incumbents back to Washington to do the same things. And, yes, they're the ones making the decisions, but at the end of the day, it's on us, we, the people of the United States, and we're the only ones in the planet who have a chance to fix this.
And I'm reminded of 2004 when Seymour Hersh broke the Abu Ghraib story, and it was all the rage in mainstream media for not that long. And even then, there was still fervor for this war, this current war on Iraq. And
it was June of that year, about this time of year.
And it seemed that people wanted to be shocked, but they more so didn't want to believe it or accept it or confront it. And then, of course, we hear from Rumsfeld, it's just a few bad apples, this cliche we hear time and time again, whether it's with regard to militarized police or with regard to the officers who torture prisoners in these far off prisons. And I think that again goes back to the unreality we were talking about. And that goes so far back, even be past 2004. And it's so many people don't want to accept the reality. And I'm not saying we all have the same constructed reality, but that's a reality we have to accept if we're going to move forward, as you said. And
it's a lot for people to take in. I mean, I talk about this all the time, but to ask somebody to accept that everything you ever thought is a lie, that's heavy.
Right.
That's a really big thing. And in this country, we are not aware of our actual history. We don't know actual history. We don't know truth and facts. We know propaganda. We know what, the establishment has force fed us. And it's a really big problem. I mean, that's that sign back there that we were talking about earlier. If wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by truth. And Julian Assange has said, many times that there is no one political ideology that makes any sense whatsoever, because none of them are dealing with the facts. And you can't make an educated decision about where you want to go, who you want to be as a country, as a people, as a species. You can't do those things unless you're dealing with reality. And we aren't. We're dealing with lies. We're dealing with obfuscation. We're dealing with all of these forces that are actively trying to suppress knowledge and information. It's really, really, really terrifying to me. And especially, I mean, now we see, just for example, today, the United States took over Press TV. They just took over.
Yeah.
You try to get on there and you get a thing that, nope, this has been taken down or whatever. The fact that they're trying to extradite Julian Assange and charge him under our Espionage Act. He's an Australian citizen. He isn't even an American. WikiLeaks has never been an American company, and they want to charge us under our laws, but afford him none of the protections of such. It doesn't make any sense. And if they're allowed to do that, I mean, essentially what is happening right now as we speak is the United States is seeking global jurisdiction over journalism and information. And that should terrify everyone. These are people who have repeatedly lied. It's not like we don't know it. It's funny. In prepping for this show, for this interview, I went back and watched some old news clips around the time that the CIA torture report was released. And Joe Scarborough, I am no fan of Joe Scarborough, but and he said like a lot of really dumb things in this same segment. But in this segment, he said, I can tell you that in 5 years, when somebody comes out and exposes the drone program, you're going to see that is way worse than what you're finding in the CIA torture report. And he's not wrong. Daniel Hale came out and exposed the drone program, and they literally had baseball cards of people that they deemed to be bad and unworthy of life. And then they would go through them every day and decide who dies.
Well, the Obama administration would sit down every Tuesday and draw up lists, kill lists, and they were called Terror Tuesdays among the elite, among the dynasty that participated in them. So in a sense, Scarborough was right, but I don't want to make any kind of comparison.
I don't mean by the comparison. I'm just saying that he said in 5 years, when somebody comes out and exposes the drone program, you're going to see that all of these things he was speaking on it more of like, this is being used as a political weapon. Mm-hmm. They're doing this because it makes the Bush administration look bad. You know what I mean? Like, that's what his position was coming from, that, this is a political thing. And when the drone program is exposed 5 years from now, then you're going to see that they're all doing the same horrible stuff all the time.
Connect two dots if I can on the drone program. People forget that the targets have included a US citizen and his 16-year-old kid who was killed based on his father's speech while their family was in federal court trying to vindicate their rights as US citizens. Right. That already happened.
That was Anwar al-Awlaki's son, and then Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki. And from what I read, the only way they were able to identify Abdul Rahman after he was slaughtered was by a piece of his scalp that was laying in the street. And that speaks to the utter brutality of the strikes, but also
That was a kid born in the United States.
Right.
Yeah, was extrajudicially killed.
And he had a Facebook page, and he was eating outside at a bazaar with his cousin, who was also murdered in that drone strike. And then I want to add to that that the restrictions around when a drone strike can be carried out are so bare, so minimum, that
they're meaningless.
It basically goes by this idea of patterns of life. So if there are a certain amount of military aged males collected that a drone can spot from wherever it's hovering, then that constitutes enough to carry out a drone strike. So that's why we see wedding parties getting hit. That's why we see funerals getting hit. And that's a huge problem. And that again goes back to this basically complete lack of oversight that we see with regard to the torture program as well.
I want to link it back to a thing that you talked about maybe a couple of minutes ago. There was a point where you were talking about the torture in detention facilities far afield. If there's a theme here, I'm trying to emphasize is just how much our interests as Americans are ultimately inextricably connected here. And I'm thinking specifically about not torture in the CIA black sites or at Abu Ghraib, but the kind that we practice routinely in US prisons, right? So this is a extended solitary confinement is acknowledged around the world as a torture technique, forced feeding people who are on hunger strikes, which we do at Guantanamo still, internationally recognized as torture techniques. Torture in the US, even if the CIA's program got closed down, torture remains widespread to this day within the US, and Americans are the targets. I lived in Chicago in the 1990s when a police commander by the name of John Burge was revealed to have for decades been using torture techniques to coerce hundreds of false confessions from African-American defendants using techniques that he had learned in Vietnam when he himself was a prisoner of war. And the idea that police officers are using torture techniques that they learn as prisoners of war against innocent people in our own communities, and they get away with it for decades, is, these aren't just problems for other people. These aren't just problems for the Vietnamese. These aren't just problems for the Iraqis. These aren't just problems for people in Syria. These aren't just problems for people who are on the other end of the weapons that we manufacture and sell. These are problems for us here
in our neighbors. Yeah. 100%. You're absolutely right. And I think that that's going back to what you were talking about earlier about how, a lot of the quote unquote left, which I really despise labels. They're always co-opted. They're used to divide. It's a whole thing. I get the point of their use, but it's just really frustrating. But the left, the quote unquote, the left about how, they're very focused on Medicare for all and $15 an hour and all that stuff, but they don't think about foreign policy in any way. And to me, that's the huge divide. That's the divide that I find with, quote unquote progressives, because I am somebody who is very much worried about ending imperialism. 100%. It's not negotiable for me. Protecting press freedom, freedom of speech, civil liberties, ending the wars. These are huge deals for me. And I think for a lot of people who consider themselves on the left, those are very periphery issues if they even think about them at all. And I've seen some of them. I mean, you have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is openly cheering on authoritarianism as far as censorship and all of this stuff goes. So that's really troubling to me that we have people who consider themselves on the left cheering on these sorts of things and this kind of authoritarianism.
This is one way I hope to be helpful, because if I do have the privilege of serving in Congress, I would be very eager to articulate a different brand of socialism that is much more rooted in international solidarity. I think Ilhan does a great job of this, frankly, among the voices in the squad now. It's why she is so frequently a target for the Democratic leadership. That's why I'm so adamant about exposing that conflict of interest, right? And why I think it's so important that we in the body politic recognize it, in order, frankly, to create more space and back up that perspective and send some more voices to Washington who will displace some of these architects of the military-industrial complex with voices that are committed to and have been committed to restraining it. I think back to when I was graduating from law school in 2003, one of the first sort of like public political things I had a chance to do was shut down a Lockheed Martin facility a few weeks after the invasion of Iraq. And we did that with 5,000 people from around the Bay Area. 50 people got arrested. It was this thing that we worked on for weeks. And I think back on that as frankly, something I'm very proud to have done it. And I frankly wish it was that kind of action was more widespread today, because it's that kind of resistance. We shut down the port of Oakland twice that year to try to stop striker shipments to Iraq. That actually happened again recently to block a ship from Israel from docking here in the Bay. There have been actions up and down the West Coast. Those kinds of port solidarity actions are incredibly important. And just to underscore the relevance and the critical nature of direct action at a time like this, to force conversations that the establishment is not willing to have. If we're not going to have these conversations in the newspapers, then we really do need to have them in the streets.
Yes.
And seeing people, it's why I'm super proud of the work that you and everybody who's been in the streets have been doing recently, from, I think especially about in the last few weeks, when so many people around the country were turning out for Palestine solidarity actions. That is so incredibly important, because that's why when the Democratic leadership went after Ilhan, it's why there was a response now, right? That wasn't there before. I see the tide turning. It hasn't turned yet, but it's turning.
And I think that that's why we were talking about this earlier, but I think that this is why we've seen the increased attacks on dissent. It's why we see anti-protest bills in states all across the country. I have 4 in my state right now. We see anti-BDS laws. Now we have Joe Biden putting out this memo talking about, these DVEs and how it's literally everybody. They're coming for literally anybody. It's all very vague. It's talking about how if you're violent, but here's the thing, it's not like we don't have an unbelievable amount of evidence that a peaceful protest can be turned violent very quickly by infiltrators, by cops. And that's exactly how they're going to get you. People keep saying, oh, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's just if you're violent. Well, they're going to make you violent, or they're going to, claim you were violent. They're going to say you were violent. And you really, whose word are they going to take, you or the cop? I mean, I think we all know where this is going. And it's really terrifying to me that we have people who are very blasé about this and acting like it's not a big deal. Your voice, what's happening to Julian Assange, the anti-protest bills, the anti-BDS laws, all of this stuff is interconnected, and it is all meant to silence you. It is all meant to squash dissent. And we're in a really, really dangerous position right now. And it's a very, I hate slippery slope. It's very cliche, but it is the slipperiest of slopes.
We flew off the slope. We are hurtling down.
Yes. And I'm telling you, I know that Assange is obviously my focus and I talk about it too much, but if he's allowed to be extradited, we lose press freedom. It's over. You're done. That's it. The United States then has global jurisdiction over journalism, and they can go and they can arrest anybody, anytime, anywhere for publishing or posting or whatever, something that they don't like or that embarrasses them. Have you ever shared a WikiLeaks link? I have. They could come for me. This is essentially what they're saying. It's what they said in court. And that should terrify everybody. And it's all interconnected to this anti-protest stuff and to all of the DVE things and all of this. They're setting this authoritarian stage, and we're like being led right into it. And again, some of us, people who consider themselves on the left, are cheering it on because they're silencing people they don't like. And so it's good for their team and they don't care. And that's very frustrating to me.
So short-sighted.
And this goes back to narrative control. And part of that narrative control is rewriting legal frameworks so that something like torture becomes an enhanced interrogation technique, and therefore it's allowed. And I think in that context, one person we should point out who should be in a doc in The Hague as well is John Yoo, who is responsible for basically writing the overall legal framework to legalize torture by the U.S.
There's a federal judge on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, Jay Bybee, who was also part of that process. John Hughes, a law professor. Jay Bybee is a federal judge. When we have judges, Brett Kavanaugh worked on the torture analysis in the Bush administration. We have justices of the Supreme Court. 70 years ago, we sent a justice of the Supreme Court to establish the Nuremberg precedent. Today, we have justices of the Supreme Court who are guilty of international human rights violations under it. That's how far we have fallen.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where he's cooling his heels, probably at a think tank somewhere, but he's still...
I think he's at UC Berkeley. John Yoo?
He still regularly appears on Fox, MSNBC, CNN. I don't know.
It is Mockingbird Media is amazing. They don't even hide it anymore. They just hire them. They just hire these spooks to come on MSNBC and be paid contributors. It's amazing.
And
he's
again,
considered just normalized it.
He's considered something like a legal consultant.
Or expert.
How laughable.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What kind of world are we living in where somebody who tried to legalize torture is considered a legal consultant?
And somebody who exposed torture like John Kiriakou had his life ruined.
No, I idea that these double standards exist. I mean, it's each of those things. It's like, it would be bad enough if the torturers were rewarded. It would be bad enough if justice weren't arbitrary. You put those two things together, and it would be bad enough if people were in the dark, but all of those things together, it is a whole worse than the sum of its parts. And there's a thought I had a minute ago. It'll come to me at some point. But I do think that there's a real need for us to reclaim the future and not to defer to this. And I see, your journalism as a critical step in that process. Everybody who's turning out for direct action is a critical step in that process. The electoral challenges to the incumbents from a constitutional vector, all of it are critical parts in the process. They all have to happen for us to find our way to a different future. And that's again why I'm so grateful to be with you today. Oh, I remember what it was now. Ken Klippenstein put out a report just today. You referenced it before, but it's important to grapple with the categorization of domestic violent extremists to include everyone from anarchists to socialists. I've worked on fighting FBI domestic surveillance for the better part of 15 years. Under the Bush administration, it was animal rights activists and earth liberation activists and Muslims who were being targeted. In fact, the targeting of the animal rights community started even before that under the Clinton administration. And then, in an earlier era, it was Latin American solidarity activists. And an era before that, it was Vietnam peace activists and civil rights activists. There has never, since the Second World War, been an era when we have not been spying on domestic social movements. And for the Biden administration to effectively be training, this was a military training document to naval military police, for the Biden administration through military intelligence to be promoting these canards that domestic social movements are threats instead of constitutionally protected, is part of this.
It's crazy
Chain of authoritarianism being built around us. I really appreciate, Misty, that you named it. I think what we are dealing with at the moment is a crisis in democracy. And the question, it's not so much a left versus right thing. No. I'm here to defend democracy. I see that as the central thing that is being threatened. And I would even escalate maybe one part of what you were saying before. You were saying if Assange is extradited, then it's XYZ. I think we're past that point.
Mm-hmm.
Like we are already there because the US is asserting these interests. We haven't been successful yet in closing the authoritarian door on democracy yet.
But the chilling effect has been, it's already substantiated. Journalism has been forever ruined. I don't know that they can ever come back from it. Again, there's some bright spots in independent media that are doing some really amazing work on the groundwork. Eva Bartlett, Vanessa Beeley, even like the Gray Zone, Aaron Matei going to Syria and all of this. There are some really bright spots out there, but I think right now what we're dealing with is this chilling effect where journalists are afraid to tell stories. They're afraid to uncover things. Just look at our mainstream media. Our mainstream media is an absolute joke. It is an absolute
Well, a lot of
joke.
times you can't even get to the sources, right? It's not just the journalists, it's the whistleblowers too.
Mm-hmm.
Think about like journalists need sources to cover, and there's any number of people in the government, especially in the intelligence and the military community, who just don't have whistleblower rights.
Well, and why would any whistleblower ever subject themselves to the things that have happened to whistleblowers? If you look at the way that they've treated Reality Winner, if you look at the way that they treated Chelsea Manning, if you look at the way that they treated John Kiriakou, if you look at the way that they're treating Daniel Hale right now, who they arrested claiming that he was he was in a bad mental health state and he needed to be protected. So they put him in solitary? That makes no sense. This is an intentional public torturing of people. That's what I keep saying about Julian Assange. It's not about Julian Assange. Yes, they want to shut him up, but it's really about silencing everybody else. It's really about making sure that there is never anybody brave enough to do what Julian Assange did ever again. And that's why they drag this out. That's why this has been going on for over a decade. He released it himself. He leaked the Stratfor emails where they very much talked about how they were going to deal with their problem named Julian Assange. And one of the ways in which they said they were going to do that was to subject him to 25 years of court stuff. And that's exactly what they're doing. He's right now languishing in a supermax prison after a judge has already ruled in his favor against extradition. And they've done it, to be fair, in fairness to the United States. Are you kidding me? That's ridiculous.
They can point the finger at us and say, well, under Obama, you did away with habeas corpus. So why should we follow the writ of habeas corpus? And on top of that, what you're saying, Misty, is that one way or another, they intend to torture him to death and increase or probably make fully recognize the chilling effect that we've been talking about.
That's
And it's a
100% what
chilling
this is
effect that
about.
doesn't just hurt journalists, and it doesn't just hurt whistleblowers, it hurts the
Hurts
public.
everybody. That's Shahid, I'm telling you, I get so angry because I can't find the words. I cannot find the words to get people to understand that that's what this is about. This people, they do the whole thing. Well, he's a hacker, he's a rapist, he's a Russian spy, he's a Trump supporter, he's a this, he's none of that matters. I don't know how to get people to understand that. I don't care if Julian Assange is literally the biggest asshole on planet Earth. I don't care if he's the biggest jerk, that he's disgusting, that he smells bad, that he's offensive, that he says degrading things about women. I don't care. I do not care. What's happening to him is wrong. And it also is extremely dangerous for me, for my neighbors, for the world in general. And I don't know how to get people to understand and to step away from their biases and their received opinions about Julian Assange. You've been lied to. You've been propagandized. I just invite people to just go look at the facts. Once you look at the actual facts of the case surrounding Julian Assange, it very quickly falls apart. It's obvious bullshit. None of it makes sense. They've admitted to it in court. The prosecutor got laughed at in court. He got called out by his own witness, a guy that he said, or that he was using in another case, was defending Julian Assange or speaking in the defense of Julian Assange. And he questioned his credentials. And he's like, you didn't seem to have a problem with my credentials last week in the other case we were doing together.
Mhm.
And it's, it's that kind of thing that's happening. It's a kangaroo court of the highest order. And the human rights abuses, we talk about human rights abuses. The human rights abuses committed against Julian Assange are numerous and intense. He was spied on in the Ecuadorian embassy for a long time. His conversations with his lawyers, his conversations with his family, everybody, all of the people that came to visit him, you were spied on. There were microphones in the women's restroom. I mean, that's to the extent that we're talking. That alone should have his case just completely lit on fire, thrown out the window, done. We're done. Let him go home, pay him some reparations. This is ridiculous. And instead, people are just going along with it. And I can't find the words to get people to recognize how dangerous this is.
I don't have answers, but just one idea there, and I think this is when you were talking about all the smears that have been cast in so many directions, the personalization of politics.
Nope. Did he freeze again?
Oh, you can't. Did you lose me?
No. Yeah, you froze a little bit
Just
there.
for a few seconds.
Yeah, just for a few seconds. Go ahead.
Just saying that the personalization of politics, I think, is part of the problem. And it helps if people can think about the principles that are at stake. Whatever we might think about the people, the fact of the matter is just take a step back from the figures and just think about their roles. You're talking about a publisher who revealed war crimes to the public being prosecuted by the Pentagon. How can anybody look at that and not see the corruption staring them in the face? And people might say, oh, it's not, my problem because he's playing for this team, or, oh, he also then leaked this other stuff and that makes him a bad person. It's not about that. It's about transparency. We're ultimately talking about here the public's right to know information. And if you believe in democracy, any meaningful version of it requires democratic transparency. We can't have government for, of, and by the people if we don't know what our government's doing in our names. That's
especially given that the government that is doing things in our names has been proven time and time again to be doing horrible things.
That's right.
This is that you've lost your privilege or presumption of being able to do whatever you want. Like, you don't get that anymore. You had your shot, you blew it, and now to me, and again, Assange does this all the time too. People in positions of power should have absolutely no privacy, none whatsoever. In that position, you should be constantly watched and looked at, and everything should be out in the open, everything should be on the table, and people should have privacy. You should have all the privacy in the world, and we have that completely flipped right now. They know where you shop and what kind of shoes you buy and what movies you like, and whether you like Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever. Like, they know everything. They know where your kids go to school and who their best friends are, and they know everything about you, and you know nothing about what they're doing, nothing, except for the every once in a while the whistleblowers, the courageous whistleblowers that we get that show us a little peek into what's going on behind the curtain. But we need to flip that. We need to flip that, and we need to do that immediately. That needs to change now. We're headed in a really, really, really scary direction. It's very authoritarian. It's very scary. I say it all the time. If you want to fight fascism, fight to free Assange, because that's what that is. And
to bring it back to Pelosi, this time around, she wasn't even officially voted into or back into her speaker role. It was a backroom deal that she negotiated with other senior Congress people I believe, to remain Speaker of the House until a certain age. And then she claims that she's going to step down.
She
She
wasn't
claims
supposed
that
to go
she
for speaker this time. She said that last time. She's like, I won't, okay, if you make me speaker this time, I won't go for it next time. And then she went for it anyways. And what frustrates me is the progressives who go in there and vote for Nancy Pelosi. Forget force the vote. That shouldn't have even been a consideration ever, ever. I'm not voting for Nancy Pelosi. If I get into Congress, and no, never. I don't even care. Like, I don't even care if she tells me she'll force a vote on Medicare for all. I want a laundry list of stuff, and I want it in advance. I'm not going to like, okay, you promised me this stuff and I'll vote for you, and then I'll count on you to do those things for me. Absolutely not. You need to give me that stuff in advance. Otherwise,
I'd
I'm
like to
not
get
voting for
beyond
you.
this and just take her out of the chamber. I mean,
Yes.
I respect where you're at, Misty, but I would say that even that's, frankly, to your point about people having proven their stripes, there's no reason to even get there. The only reason she's still in Congress, just to be clear, is because she ducks debates and the press let her get away with it. So when we're talking about manufactured consent, I've had an opportunity to observe it up close and personal. If I may, just to reflect on that, because we will soon be relaunching our campaign, and I think I'd love for your viewers to know where I'm at. So I had the honor last year of winning more votes against Pelosi than anyone ever has. We won 30% more votes than Cindy Sheehan did 15 years ago. That was the previous high water mark. And we did that in the middle of a pandemic. We couldn't knock on a single door during the general election period in the face of a corporate media whiteout. And the rare occasion when anyone in the press would talk about me, it was in the context of a series of racist disinformation campaigns that were spread across the Democratic Party establishment. And in that context, I don't see Pelosi going back to Congress. And if she does retire, which is a possibility, multiple outlets have suggested that they're going to run her daughter in her wake. And the only thing that offends me more than the collapse of our democracy and the rise of authoritarianism is the resurgence of monarchy in the form of inherited political office and nepotism.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to ask you about the dynasty aspect of not just Pelosi, but the retinue she surrounded herself with over decades.
It's real. I mean, she herself is the both child and matriarch of a political dynasty. Her father was the mayor of Baltimore, Maryland in the 50s, in an era when it was notorious for a great many things. And her nephew is currently the governor of California. She's been in Congress for 30 years, right? There is absolutely a family business run here around politics, but it's not. I think family business is actually an apt moniker, because it's not just about public service. This is an extraordinarily wealthy family, right? She's the 7th wealthiest member of Congress. And I dare say, particularly when you look at the history of insider trading that the incumbent has unfortunately engaged in, it does seem that the enlargement of a private fortune has been at least as much of a priority as the public interest, given that the public interest has so rarely found expression in her legislative record and her fortune has grown so dramatically. I think it's problematic when we have policymakers who are steering federal policy to fill their pockets. And that's another version of corruption, whether it's her striking at Ilhan to stay out of jail for international human rights violations, or whether it's passing tax cuts for the wealthy that favor her and her rich friends and donors. These are different dimensions of overlapping, compounding corruption. And I'm not willing to accept it. I know you all aren't willing to accept it. I hope your listeners aren't willing to accept it. And I'm eager to, frankly, make sure that we're not just talking about this stuff, but changing some ingredients in the soup. We can make different choices as a people. We can have different people cast the votes. We can hold incumbents accountable for lies, for failing to debate, for privileging power over people. These are not things that we have to defer to. And I'm just very eager to particularly offer the voters of my city an alternative, and eager to see. We need to mob up on Congress, y'all. Like, we can't defer to this. If it's another generation before we manage to get a leash on our security state, we're going to run humanity off a cliff in the meantime. Like, this is a matter of existential need for our species, for we in the United States to recover our democracy and to do it quick. And
well, we've talked about it before. I have very little faith in the electoral system as far as being a game changer. The elections are rigged. It's incredibly difficult. I mean, you've seen firsthand how elections are rigged and how she's allowed to not debate opponents, and she's given cover, and they'll, completely ignore you and not talk about you. And she's, elected and all. So I have a very hard time like accepting electoral politics. So I don't really fault anybody for wanting to take part in that system. I get like, it is like an avenue that you can attempt. Just personally, I don't feel like it's really really worthwhile. But I
It's certainly corrupt and co-opted, but I would just ask you, what's the alternative?
The alternative is building outside the system. The alternative is getting heavily engaged in mutual aid, building up your communities, making sure that you can take care of each other, because we're
Right.
failing. The empire is failing. It's going down. I don't know that we're going to be able to stop that
Right.
from happening at this point. I think we're too far gone.
Might
So
be
for
the case,
me,
if I may, I think you're describing a stool that's missing a leg. These aren't either or questions. These are yes and questions, because if you take any of those legs out of the stool, it's not going to stand. You could build all the outside power that you want, and nothing is going to change. At this scale, we're not going to restrain the Pentagon through mutual aid. With all due respect,
we're not going to restrain the Pentagon and the electoral system, in my opinion. We've seen it. I mean, look at the progressives that we've gotten elected so far. They've completely capitulated.
But that's completely not the test. The progressives we sent so far aren't dedicated to this. One of them, Ilhan, is, and you've seen her raise a flag and she takes attacks for it. With all due respect, all I'm saying is I respect outside the system activism. It's where I came from, right? Like a shut down Lockheed Martin, I've gotten arrested in Congress. I get it. And all I'm saying is if we disregard electoral politics, we ensure the long-term marginalization of our movement, because the only way to take the success from outside the system and make it effectuate into something different in the ultimate outcome is if we are changing policy. And there's only one route to do that. It is tough. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. Like, I get that it's corrupt and it's co-opted, but if we think that there's no hope in that system, we are sealing the outcome at the outset.
It's hard, almost impossible for me to see hope in that system anymore. Yeah. But that's not to say I don't understand where you're coming from.
No, I do. I just disagree. I just think that, I mean, maybe local politics, going and voting for your school board, or any maybe ballot measures that you have that could affect your local communities, that makes sense to me. But I think federal elections, even state elections, are very difficult. They're incredibly rigged. It's unbelievably corrupt. And again, I don't fault people. I think it's a good thing for somebody like you to like get out there and to involve yourself in the system. It brings publicity to issues that we're all fighting for. I just don't know that they have complete control. They have 100% control over the system in electoral politics. And I just don't, again, I don't fault anybody. I just don't personally think that it's not where I choose to spend my time. I don't think you're
faulting me. I just, no, and I'm not encouraging you to spend your time there. I just want to just get like real about the theory of change here. If electoral politics is not part of the theory of change, there is literally no way we are ever going to restrain the Pentagon. No number of school board seats can stop the military-industrial complex. No number of mutual aid projects can stop the military-industrial complex. There's only one thing that can stop the military-industrial complex, and that's we, the people of the United States, asserting our democratic control of this machine. And I totally get that it's corrupt. You're absolutely right. And you know, I think we're talking past each other. You're telling me that it's hopeless, and I'm telling you that it's the only way. And I understand that it seems hopeless, and I have taken on struggles that seem hopeless before, and I've won them. When we won marriage equality, that was hopeless in 2004. Nobody thought we were going to win that. When I fought government surveillance and got communities around the country to restrain spying, people told us it was impossible. I know that it seems really hard, and I know that the people we've sent to Washington before have been disappointing. All I'm trying to say to you is that there is literally no other way. And we will.
But I think that that's kind of a contradiction, because what got those things accomplished was pressure from outside, was movements from outside, was actions from outside. And that great, like you have to have mass public pressure. And I don't think it really matters at this point who sits in office. I just really don't. I mean, it doesn't, and you say, well, you just haven't had the right ones. And I mean, maybe that's true. I mean, Steve Cox is my friend from California. He's running for office as well. I love Steve Cox. And I think that he might be, but when you get into that system, I don't know how you can, what's the word I'm looking for? Avoid collapsing. Yeah, maintain your independence. They suck you in and they'll beat you down. And if you don't acquiesce, then they'll make sure that you're not in office anymore. They'll find a way to screw over your district or to do whatever that they need to do so that you will get voted out, or they'll find a way, some scandal, they'll try to get some scandal going and they'll get you out. And that's what I'm saying, is that the system is so corrupt. I just don't think that it's too far gone, in my opinion. Again, that's just my opinion. I just think it's too far gone. And I think that at this point, it really is going to come down. Again, I think we're going to collapse. It's going to collapse. We're not far from it. And it's going to be ugly. But I think that that's why we have to focus on building up our communities, taking care of our neighbors, that kind of a thing, because nobody's going to come save us. There's no politician that's going to save us.
I agree with that. But I don't think it's the politicians going to come to save us. I think we, the people of the United States, have to save our
Right, which is what I'm kind of talking about. We have to save ourselves in our communities. I just think we have a difference of opinion on the efficacy of electoral politics. To me, I was very skeptical of Bernie Sanders. I've always been kind of against electoral politics. I was skeptical of him, but I had some hope. And when somebody like that completely turns his back on his supporters and doesn't say a word about the fact that he was openly cheated in a rigged primary, that's it. I was done with electoral politics at that point. And we've only just seen it get worse, really. I mean, even Ilhan Omar, who, you're right, has done some great things, she capitulates all the time. I mean, even her criticism against Israel was very tepid. And then she immediately walked it back, was like, oh, I'm sorry. And now Gaza's under attack again. No progressive has said a word. They haven't said a word, not one word. And that to me is like,
I'm
okay.
not defending the progressives in Congress. I'm just saying that we need new voices. And I think we are actually proving the point. I think we're on the same page. All I'm suggesting is that if we abandon electoral politics, the Pentagon will remain unrestrained. And there's nothing else. There's no other way to it. I totally get your point that it's corrupt, that the people there aren't doing it. I don't think that necessarily proves the point that there's any other way to get there, right? What we are frankly grappling with at the moment is the conundrum of our democracy. How, in a country that falsely thinks it's free, can the people meaningfully assert control over what our government does? And this gets us into that's a crazy thicket to try to unpack. All I'm suggesting is that we have a formal mechanism, and it is the only mechanism that can restrain this very powerful thing that we, the people, have built. And we can either get it back on a leash or we won't. And I get also that maybe we're in a different place about whether or not the ship has sailed or the door of authoritarianism is closed in our democracy. I'm not willing to throw in the towel yet. And I will fight with my dying breath to save our democracy.
Oh, there have been no towels thrown. I don't know if you've noticed. It's not like I've given up. I still very much fight on a daily basis. I just fight in a different way. I just fight outside the electoral system, which again, this is just a difference of opinion, and it's fine to disagree on strategy and tactics. Yeah.
You fight we've talked about the whole in journalism. So, what you're doing is incredibly important. So I don't mean in any way to diminish it.
It's just a difference of opinion on tactics. That's all.
Shahid, I wanted to ask you, again, going off what you and Misty were just talking about, because you mentioned earlier climate change, global warming, the eco disaster we're already in the middle of. And you just described your plan or outlined your plan as a politician and why you take the position you do. Given the acceleration of climate change and the dying of the earth, essentially, do you think there's enough time to work through electoral politics to take down the Pentagon, for example?
I do think there's a great deal of urgency. And when you ask me, is there time? I mean, literally the question, I think of this as a race between a capitalist death cult and people who would liberate our societies and free us from, whether it's the corruption of the military-industrial complex or fossil fuel dependence. It is literally, the race is an apt metaphor, and I think the entire future rides on it. And I don't know if we have time or not, but I'm about to find out.
We're all about to find out, unfortunately.
Right? I mean, none of us have the privilege of watching or observing. That might be a thing that I see you too as a journalist stepping beyond the mere act of observation. I think so many people rest at observation, but the need to act at a moment like this, to assert, to raise your voice, to connect, to network, to organize, whether it's in the electoral sphere, whether it's in grassroots journalism, whether it's in street activism and direct action, mutual aid, whatever it is, this is a time when we need everyone who gets what's happening to act. And my biggest concern about this political moment is so many people are on their heels because disillusion is constraining them from acting. And we can't, as a movement, afford the disillusion. The future doesn't have the time for our worries to inhibit us. And I think it's really important for all of us to lean into the possibilities that the future might still afford, even if they seem daunting, even if it seems uphill. And I think a lot about the past and the things that we as a species have confronted and overcome before. It wasn't that long ago, 75 years ago, everybody from my native country was a vassal of a foreign power, outright imperialism. And I've seen things change. I've had a chance to help change things, and marriage equality in particular, I've seen It's not material conditions. But it's a very dramatic change in the lives of the people who can have families who couldn't a generation ago. And I've seen progress, and I know that we can attain progress, even as dark as our day seems. We have to recognize that our forebears, frankly, have dealt with far worse, right? I mean, think about the age of the antebellum South and the Underground Railroad. People have dealt with dire circumstances and they have overcome. We can overcome too. We have to. And if we don't, the consequences are dire. It's all the more reason I think that it's important for all of us to lean into the future. I just saw the time. I think I need to really go.
Yeah, sorry,
Okay,
we did keep
no
you. You've
problem.
been very generous with your time, actually. Do you want to tell everybody? I know that you said you're about to relaunch the
Yeah.
campaign. Do you have a new website or anything like that, or is that still coming up?
I'm happy to share it. Yeah, shahidforchange.us or shahid.fyi is a shorthand. And then you can find us on all the social media networks as well, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We'll be launching in July. And I will note that we've got a deadline at the end of this month. If anybody's interested in joining us, we'd certainly welcome the support.
Excellent. And, as the campaign goes on, as much as I don't agree in electoral politics, I'm always happy to have you on to talk about things. I find you incredibly fascinating. I enjoy talking to you. So it's not that it's not like a personal thing.
No, I get
it's,
it.
I like talking to politicians. It's just, we have a disagreement on tactics. So thank you for coming on again. It was a really awesome conversation as usual. Everybody go and check out the website. And if you're able to volunteer, donate, whatever, to help them out, it would really be nice. I mean, as much as I don't agree with electoral politics, it would be really nice to get Nancy Pelosi out of office. That would be excellent. I would have a little one-woman party in my living room. So let's do that. Let's do that. Okay,
And
let's do that.
Shahid, for what it's worth, Max Blumenthal, who's, I suppose you could say, a friend of mine, said you're the real deal. So
yes, he did say that. And I trust Max. So
yeah.
that's
Been at this a long time.
good seal of approval. So thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate talking to you. And thanks everybody for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Shahid.
My honor. Thanks for having me on. Bye, y'all.
Thank you.